thank you for joining me. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Dr Rachael Kent. I'm a teaching fellow in digital media and culture in the Department of Digital Humanities.
And can you please tell me about the research you've been doing around digital behaviours in the COVID-19 lockdown?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been looking at how people's use of digital technology has been changing during particularly the lockdown phase of COVID-19. So specifically around how it's shifting social interactions and also our health practices in everyday life.
And can you tell me about some of your key findings so far in the research?
So I've been conducting empirical research with a group of individuals between the age of 26 and 60 years old, based in the UK and in Australia as well. And so the key findings are kind of situated in two different strands. The first strand being around how social media and digital technology is shaping our social interactions and communication. And some of the key findings from that, particularly around social media use, has been, of course, more screen time, more scrolling time, certainly more compulsions to use the technology. But when we're looking at also the sharing practices, how those etiquettes have changed, particularly around Instagram, for example. So that being this fear of missing out has now shifted towards a fear of not being productive. So this idea that we're seeing a lot of other people's content in isolation, these personal growth stories, artisan baking, for example, or learning a new language, adopting a new hobby, and people really feeling this kind of comparative need to also adopt these same behaviours in their homes in everyday life. So that's some of the key findings from the social media side of things. And from the health side, what was really interesting was the different geographic differences between how people perceive agency and freedom and restriction, particularly during the lockdown phase. So those in cities feeling a greater sense of restriction, kind of an increased navigation of what I'm calling the social distancing dance on a city street, the kind of perceived judgment of other people's physical movements and behaviours, and this can be, offline, on the physical street. So if somebody invades your 2-metre rule, for example, how that can kind of create judgment and more surveillance of others. As well as how when people are living in more rural locations, they have a greater sense of freedom, and also how that translates online. So we are increasing our surveillance of other people's behaviours by what they're sharing on social media. So if somebody is sharing an image of being out of the house for a period of time in the day, they often have to justify and legitimate that that is their once daily exercise regime, for example.
And what do you think some of these changes in our behaviour online might mean for the future, perhaps when lockdown is eased?
I think pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, there was quite a dystopian conversation and embodiment of particularly social media, this idea that we're becoming addicted to our screens, that it's very comparative and damaging to our mental health. I think now the lockdown has shed light on the amazing connectivity that it can enable, but it has also created new pressures. So we're drawing people into our intimate spaces more, into our isolation bubbles, if you will, which is certainly blurring work and leisure and work and home life boundaries even more pervasively than it was pre-lockdown. And I think particularly my participants, I identified this feeling of this dissolving of hierarchies between staff members and colleagues. So particularly from junior staff members to more senior, when you're having frequent Zoom, Skype or MS Teams conversations and meetings, you're physically drawing into people's homes. So that's kind of creating what they argued as a more kind of democratic or dissolving of hierarchies and new intimacies, new dynamics, new relationships. So I think that is the potentially more utopian, but also perspective, but also creates new pressures as well. I also think that it's creating an environment which is making us be more critical and more reflexive around digital detoxing and managing the on and offline work and leisure divide. We're all having to be incredibly strict and self-regulatory about not just mediating our entire lives outside of the home via a screen. So I think, and I hope that post lockdown, when we come out the other side of this, it will enable a kind of healthier relationship with our technology.
Great. And finally, what kind of impacts do you hope your research will have on the public?
I really hope that it'll make people see their relationship with the technology in a different way, because we kind of perceive this technology as an extension of our physicality, even more so in this space. So we can celebrate its benefits, and we can also, I hope, perceive its kind of limitations or restrictions or disruptions in a more holistic way. I think it's kind of forcing us to have all these spheres of our lives, all these different facets being created and being kind of entwined in one space. So I think and I hope that moving forward, we can create a more kind of critical and reflexive relationship. And I think it's because of that criticality, I'm hoping that, you know, the conversations we can have around technology moving forward can be kind of more beneficial, and we can kind of take a step back and look more objectively about our practices.
Great, that's all really fascinating. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon, Dr. Kent, and all the best with your research.